they found them, they're dead.
The way he killed them was just horrible.
His brutality was just over the top.
She screamed until she could scream no more.
The state of Texas has never seen a crime like this.
This guy was hunting women all the time.
He was a monster. I don't think he had any conscience.
I just thought he had the coldest eyes I've ever seen in my life. Satan's son.
They released a murderer.
He was paroled.
Freed to kill.
He was known as the broomstick killer, and I had to catch him.
The system let us down.
You may have a guy out there killing tonight.
We have to get him back and put him away.
It's not safe to be around him. He'll kill you.
It's a lonely stretch of Interstate 35 located south of Waco. A dark, isolated place. And there's a dim light coming from a convenience store. Desolate and deserted in the middle of nowhere, pitch black, dark in the middle of the night. A place you wouldn't want your wife, your daughter, and maybe not even yourself to work.
It was about the only thing on that stretch of the interstate. It was the last stop leaving town and maybe the first stop coming in.
Working alone in what was called the graveyard shift was a petite brunette woman, Melissa Northrup, a 22-year-old pregnant mother of 2 children, all alone, nobody watching her back.
Melissa was unfortunate to work where she did and when she did. The sad truth of life is that there's a lot of people that have a job they don't want, but they need it. And I think that was Melissa Northrup. She struggled. Her family struggled financially. And so she had the job that nobody wanted, which is working in a convenience store in the middle of the night, right off an interstate highway, which under any circumstances is dangerous.
Unless someone happens to drive up to get a tank of gas, nobody's going to be there except the attendant behind that counter.
When she has to go back to restock things, she's alone. She doesn't know who comes in the door, and the security cameras don't work. She'd like a bell on the door to ring, and she's told her mother that the management has told her, well, you just need to get a hearing aid.
The night that she left for work, just hugging her and telling her I loved her. And said, be careful, I'll see you in the morning. Didn't see her the next morning.
So here she is, very, very vulnerable.
And because she worked those hours, her husband did check on her. He tried to call her and couldn't get her. He kept trying, he couldn't reach her. That was not right.
Around 4:45 in the morning, he tears out down there. And he gets down there, and there's no sign of his wife.
No one was in the store. Her purse was there. This is bad.
Very unlike her not to take her purse. But even more importantly, she's got this burnt orange Buick coupe. It's gone. No sign of it. Nowhere to be seen.
All of a sudden, she's just gone. And I don't know if you can imagine how that feels.
I got a call from her husband, and he said, "Brenda, is Melissa at home?" And I said, "No." He said, "She's not here at the store, and her car is gone." I said, "Call the police."
And that sets off then a search for Melissa Northup. Helicopters are put up, searching the area, no sign of her. She's disappeared in the dead of night, and there is no clue of what's happened to her.
Brenda Solomon is Melissa's mother.
It eats at you every minute of the day. If we knew something, we want Melissa home. We love her and we miss her.
A few days later, Melissa Northup's car turns up, very distinctive looking, at a gravel pit in southern Dallas County, about 60 miles away. Melissa was a small woman. They find that the driver's seat of the car has been pushed way back for a taller driver. On the very day that Melissa Northup's car is found abandoned, the owner and the manager of the New Road Inn Motel, which is located in Waco, about 200 yards from the convenience store where Melissa Northup's gone missing, calls the police.
Waco PD.
And he complains there's a tan Thunderbird coupe that's been sitting out there for 2 days in the parking lot and is blocking the entrance for truckers. Well, the police come out, run the registration on the Thunderbird. And it's registered to Kenneth Allen McDuff.
I was working narcotics cases with City of Waco police and with a couple of my best friends who were U.S. Marshals in Waco, Mike and Parnell, the McNamara brothers. One day, I'd pick them up for lunch, and they were standing outside the federal building talking to a very young FBI agent.
And just in a casual passing, the FBI agent says, "Hey guys, does the name Kenneth McDuff mean anything to you?"
That agent just said they found McDuff's car near where this girl is missing, just south of town.
And they stopped dead in their tracks.
When the McNamara brothers described to me what he had done in the 60s in Fort Worth, Texas, and that person, that creature, a serial killer, would ever be released from a cage, troubled me. That guy would ever get out of prison, I didn't understand it.
The idea that you would parole someone like Kenneth Allen McDuff, it's like something made up in a crime novel.
It turns out McDuff had indeed been paroled 3 years earlier in 1989. When McDuff walks out of prison on parole, Sheriff Larry Pamplin can't believe it.
I said, I don't know when, I don't know if it'll be this week, next month, 6 months, or a year from now, sooner or later you're going to have bodies showing up.
In the mid-1960s, Texas was primarily an agricultural state in oil. If you got out of Dallas, you got out of Houston, it was vast, wide open spaces.
Most people in Texas did not live in cities. It was just more relaxed way of life.
Small towns with main streets. People just were neighborly and took care of each other, and people were very trusting. Kenneth McDuff grows up in a small town in central Texas named Rosebud. Maybe about 2,000 people. Main town square where everybody kind of knows everybody, each other's business. They know people by the first name.
Rosebud was an ideal town. You didn't lock your doors at night, walk to town, to the Five and Dime. Everyone had beautiful yards. It was like Mayberry.
The McDuff family is notorious in town. Daddy is a concrete cement finisher. He's making a lot of money. But what they're really known for is Mama McDuff, Addie McDuff.
His mother was pretty rough. Kenneth could do no wrong in her eyes. I mean, anything Kenneth done was good.
Most people have said Miss McDuff was too lenient on him, and when he got in trouble, that he was just spoiled, and that's why he did all the things he did.
If he'd get in trouble at school, his old mother'd come down there and defend him. Kenneth didn't do no wrong, she'd say.
He got called down for misbehaving on the school bus. Addie shows up with her pistol, threatening the driver.
They called her the pistol-packing mama. He just never had a negative consequence. As bad as he was worse because his mother encouraged it.
Kenneth and his brother are just wild hellions in town. They're known as bullies. They had a threatening veneer to them. Slicked back hair in those days conveyed you were a punk. That entire town was terrified of them.
McDuff was mean and rotten, even as a boy and as a teenager.
I went to Rosebud School all 12 years. Kenneth McDuff was there. We didn't get along at all. So I guess it started the bullying in school, way back there. Because if he could push you, he'll push you around and everything, but he always had to be king of the deal. He always wanted to be in control of the situation.
A lot of his meanness was directed at women, including the women in his family.
The stories had gone around that maybe he had molested a sister or sisters, and that kind of didn't surprise me at all.
Women were objects to be abused, and later he would say he would use them up.
But if you stood up to him, he'd back off. He didn't want no part of it. He just pushed you as far as you'd let him push you.
You always do find out when bullies are faced off by somebody, they often are cowards.
A classmate of mine had a fight with Kenneth at what we call the smoking bridge. That's where it took place. Right down here. My friend got McDuff to empty his pockets. No one trusted him. He had a set of brass knuckles, and he had a knife. The fight got started. My friend got the best of him. In fact, McDuff never messed with a friend again, and it wasn't too long that they said McDuff had left school.
Kenneth McDuff, he'd get in trouble over everything. In 1964 and 65, he commits a string of burglaries and is arrested.
And he laughed it off. All those burglaries, they were just pranks. Just out there pranking people.
He said, there's a whole lot of kids out there who do the same thing and they don't go to prison.
For all these burglaries, McDuff gets a 52-year sentence, but only serves 9 months. On December 29, 1965, 19-year-old Kenneth McDuff is paroled. It ends up being Kenneth McDuff's first experience with a revolving door prison system in Texas. Texas didn't really have enough room, even in those days, to hold everybody that was coming into the system. What you learn is, I can get away with murder.
This is a warning to the citizens of Austin. Stay away from the university area.
In the months after McDuff walked out of prison on parole, this is the backdrop to what's going on.
A boy riding a bicycle has been shot and seriously wounded.
Charles Whitman had climbed the University of Texas Tower with rifles. It turned out to be the deadliest mass shooting committed by a lone mass murderer in history of the nation.
That really got everybody's attention. People were stunned by that.
A few days later, McDuff's out driving around with a guy named Roy Dale Green. McDuff has found an accomplice. He's found somebody that he thinks he can use in Roy Dale Green.
According to Green, they were just driving around in a rural part of South Tarrant County. McDuff said he wanted to look around for some girls because he was tired of the girls in his hometown.
McDuff's a big talker. And McDuff talks a big game about killing people. He likes killing people.
Well, he told me that he was looking for somebody to kill. And hell, I never dreamed I'd be involved in murder.
McDuff was already bragging about having killed some people before that. It seemed to be something that he kind of enjoyed.
One of the things he told Roy Dale was that, killing a woman is like killing a chicken. They both squawk.
Roy Dale, as perverted and strange as it sounds, is impressed by it.
He was the kind of a person who thought McDuff was cool and the guy to be around. They drove up to a town called Everman. After a few beers, McDuff got in one of his very dangerous moods.
McDuff, and these were his words, was on the hunt. He was on the hunt for victims and on the hunt for women.
Like a shark, detecting blood.
McDuff spots a car parked in a baseball field, remote area. And there are 3 teenagers there. Robert Brand, his cousin from California, Marcus Dunham, and Robert's girlfriend, Edna Louise Sullivan. Three teens are parked and they're talking, messing around, having fun. They'd tune in their favorite radio station.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Miss Sullivan was very popular at school, beloved by everyone.
Louise, she was very sweet. She loved my kids. She played with my kids when she'd come over to visit with Robert. You could tell they were crazy about one another because that's all they did was just hug and kiss and carry on like young kids do. Robert told me, he says, I'm really crazy about her. He said, I think when we graduate, we might consider getting married. I said, well, maybe you can get married in our house. He said, well, that'd be okay.
And there was supposed to have been with them another teenage girl.
And she was gonna go with Mark that night, but they drove by to pick her up and she didn't feel well, so she didn't go. So she would have been there too.
And they were alone. No baseball fans, no parents nearby, no roads passing closely. Roydale Green did not know what was getting ready to happen.
McDuff has told Roydale Green to stay in the car. He's creeping up on his prey. Kenneth McDuff was on a mission to murder.
Robert was always home on time. No matter what, he was always home. And Dad didn't rest till his kids were home.
He was always home at midnight when I told him midnight was it, you know, that's it. And he always come in on that time. That night, he didn't.
So Robert's father and brother-in-law head out in the middle of the night to find him.
Maybe he's broke down somewhere. It was probably 2 or 3 hours later, they came back, and Dad said they probably ran off and got married.
The next day, a fisherman is headed out to fish. It's a rural area, and he's going down this remote road. He's in shock. 2 boys shot in the head.
And Dad came up to me and he said, they found them. They're dead. And that was hard, very hard. I said, where's Mother? He said, she had to be sedated. It didn't happen back there. I just couldn't believe that it had happened.
I went up and identified both boys. It didn't really hit me like it did when I seen them laying like they was. Me and my wife both, she just went all to pieces.
The sheriff starts to investigate, and they realize they were out with a teenage girl, and she's not there. And now a massive search starts for where is Edna Louise Sullivan.
There were more than 100 law officers on that search. All of this was taking place in pretty rugged country. It was not easy.
And everybody from the small local towns, they join in, and they're combing through fields and the woods and ravines and streams looking for her. Roy Dale, meanwhile, is out with friends, and they're listening to the radio in the car.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
And then they hear the radio news reports about the murder of these teenagers. And this is big news in this area. This kind of stuff did not happen.
Green couldn't hold it in. He just came unglued and told his friends, I was involved in this. I just got to tell somebody about it. And they caught a hold of his mother, and his mother said, you need to turn yourself in.
Later that day, Roy Dale Green leads investigators out there searching for the body of Edna Louise Sullivan.
Green had kind of a meltdown of sorts and couldn't seem to find his way. They took him back to the jail, and he drew some crude maps of where he thought the body was. And they used those maps to finally find her body.
Beneath a thicket of oak trees, she is found lying face down, right where McDuff and Green dumped her body. Roy Dale also tells authorities where they might find Kenneth McDuff. Sheriff Sonny Elliott of a neighboring county and Sheriff Brady Pamplin of the Rosebud area and Pamplin's son Larry Pamplin, they find out McDuff is out on a date. They're going to try to catch him as he brings a young woman home. They lay in wait. McDuff spots them. They set off in a chase. It's a gun battle of the sheriffs firing at the car, trying to stop the car. They put rounds into the radiator and other places, and it disables the car. Larry Pamplin with his father, Brady, get right up beside it. And Larry has got a shotgun on him, ready to just put a round into his head. And for years and years, Larry Pamplin would regret that he didn't put a bullet in him right then and there.
When McDuff was arrested, he was very docile and he didn't fight. He knew who he could intimidate, and law enforcement officers didn't fall in that category.
McDuff has committed 3 murders. He goes out on a date. He's suddenly in a rolling gun battle with the sheriffs. And his concern is, will insurance pay for the damage to my car? Always about Kenneth.
In those days, when the police began to trust you, they would let reporters go with them when they went to investigate things. I was in Sheriff Lon Evans's patrol car to pick him up and bring him to the Tarrant County Jail. The only thing that McDuff talked about was the shooting at the University of Texas Tower. McDuff volunteered, that guy must have really been crazy.
There are certain dates you remember. We remember when Kennedy was shot. We remember when Elvis died. I remember when I heard that Kenneth had done this. When the details started coming out, you really couldn't believe it. The way he killed him was just horrible.
This murder trial is big news. The court is packed, spectators lined up outside wanting to get in.
I attended the one day of the trial, one day. And there's a lady down the way from us, and she was talking so loud. She said, he's not guilty of this. She said, I will get each and every one of them. Well, that kind of scared me.
That lady was Addie McDuff, and that was Kenneth McDuff's mother.
And she is there proclaiming the innocence of her son.
The security was so tight because there were so many threats they were getting that somebody might assassinate him.
Pawpaw brought a gun to the courthouse. I don't think anybody would have blamed him if he would have shot him.
Well, I wanted to kill him. Sure, I wanted to kill him, and a lot of other people wanted to kill him.
They took the gun away from him, let him go on in because he had to testify. But he was just a mess.
He was going to kill him. And this is the way, over the years, Dad felt. He wanted revenge.
I was already a dead man, see, as far as I was concerned, because I lost the only son I had, see.
The star witness is Roy Dale Green. He's turned state's evidence.
Green had given this lengthy confession, signed it, and was willing to repeat it.
He gets on the stand and gives this grisly testimony. McDuff forces all three teenagers into the trunk of the car at gunpoint.
Uncle Robert and my cousin Mark and Louise all got in the trunk of my uncle's car. They were all in there together.
He has Roy Dale Green follow him, and they go to another remote location.
They drove around. I wish I knew what they were thinking. I'm sure they were probably trying to think of a way to get away.
McDuff pulls Edna and Louise Sullivan out of the trunk, and he tells Roy Dale Green, "They've seen me, now I gotta kill them." The boys are begging and crying and pleading for mercy of don't do it.
Louise was standing there. Roy Dale Green said, "Oh, don't worry, he's just gonna scare them."
This boy in front of me go like this, cover his head, and that's what I did too. I turned away.
Louise, she was there.
He shoots one of the boys twice in the forehead, then shoots the other boy in the temple, puts the barrel of the revolver up to his head, and puts another round into him.
And every time I take my hand off the eyes to look, he'd shoot. And you could smell gunpowder and blood when he got through.
And he tried to close the trunk of the car, but it wouldn't go down, so he backed it up next to a fence. I suppose he thought that nobody would think anything about it.
McDuff makes Roy Dale Green drive to another location. Meanwhile, he's in the back seat raping Edna Sullivan in all manners imaginable. With the broomstick, he violates the poor girl. He threatens Roy Dale Green, and he now has to rape the girl. He's got to be part of the crime.
McDuff raped the Southern girl. I got back there and I raped her.
Once McDuff is finished with this orgy of violence, drags the girl to the back of the vehicle, and he takes each end of the jagged broomstick that he's violated her with. You can hear her neck and larynx crack. And Roy Dale comes in so that McDuff can finish the job.
And she was dead. And he slung her over a barbed wire fence like you would a dead rabbit.
They take her lifeless body and throw it in a ditch like it's trash, and then cover it with brush, and really kind of nonchalantly leave.
The brutality of the murder of Louise Sullivan was heartbreaking. that such a beautiful young girl had to go through such a trauma before being killed. This is just completely evil.
When the 3 kids got killed, I had to join the Navy. I'd get a letter or 2 from home every week. My mother stated that McDuff had killed the little girl with a broomstick and broke her neck. Then she remembered back a few years. Miss McDuff confided in me at one time that Kenneth was killing her chickens. Said he didn't know what to do with him. Said he would just take a stick, put it across their necks, and watch them die.
After torture and rape and 3 brutal murders, Roy Dale was finally brought back to his home by Kenneth McDuff. Kenneth kept telling him, if you breathe a word of this, I'm going to kill you. He saw the very same person who brutally murdered these 3 children telling him, I'm going to kill you if you open your mouth.
And now Roydell Green has told the court that McDuff violated the young lady with the broken broomstick and then later killed her with a broomstick across her neck. It's unthinkable acts. Nobody can imagine such stuff. Some of the female members of the jury have tears in their eyes. McDuff became known as the broomstick killer.
It really upset the community. I still remember it because I think it's the worst thing I ever saw. He was a monster. I don't think he had any conscience. And I remember somebody saying at the time, if there was ever a reason for the death penalty, it was Kenneth Allen McDuff.
This trial was front-page headlines day after day. McDuff being the self-centered psychopath that he is, he tells his lawyer to shut up, he's going to take the stand. And on the stand, he begins to weave this incredulous story, but he's trying to put the blame on Roydell Green.
He and I abducted 3 teenagers and raped a girl and killed them.
McDuff killed him. He's the one that killed him. My own eyes, I seen him kill 3. And if that don't call for a death penalty, what does?
The prosecutor at the time, Charlie Butts, said when McDuff testified on his own behalf that that was the single biggest blunder he's ever seen in a murder trial because Roydell Green had just testified and he was about as pathetic an individual as a person could be. He said, you could tell that he couldn't conceive of doing such a thing, much less carry it out.
There's only one person, maybe 2 people in the court that believe this story, his mother and Kenneth McDuff.
I just thought he had the coldest eyes I've ever seen in my life. Mean looking to me.
It only took the jury 4 hours to come back with a verdict that he was guilty of capital murder, and then a sentence was returned that he would die in the electric chair.
My dad was happy. I think the whole family was happy. Daddy called him the devil. He called him Satan's son.
I was tickled to death. I said, well, thank God I won't have to kill him. They'll do it themselves. And I thought surely they would.
It's crime. You kill 2 people and then rape and torture a woman and then choke her to death with a broomstick. I mean, we'd never heard or seen anything like this.
Who would ever imagine at that time, when you looked at the heinous nature of their crimes, that anyone would ever parole them? that anyone would ever release this man from prison. But it's going to happen.
I have to wonder about how did that happen? How did McDuff get out of prison? How did he get out of death row for killing 3 people back in the 60s?
The story of how McDuff got off death row and out on parole involves not only the U.S. Supreme Court, but also corruption and political cowardice in Texas itself, and that will take some explaining. In 1989, 23 years after the Broomstick murders, Kenneth McDuff is back on the street again. Just 3 months after McDuff walks out of prison on parole, his parole officer writes a memo warning that McDuff is a ticking time bomb. He's got an explosive temper, and it may go off if the wrong button is pushed. In March of 1992, 3 years after McDuff's 1989 release, a young convenience store clerk, Melissa Northrup, has disappeared, and authorities fear that Kenneth McDuff has resumed his murderous ways.
So he's out, and she's missing. And his car is found. McDuff's car is found yards away.
As the investigation unfolds, a witness reports having seen McDuff speeding away. And what got his attention was this petite woman, Melissa Northrup, terrified expression on her face in the passenger seat.
She's missing, and we don't know what else.
Now, this man was on death row. Now, I want to know why a man that's sentenced to death is out on parole. If he's got the death penalty, he should not have any chance for parole at all, none whatsoever.
So now you have a circumstantial case, but it happens to involve a killer, a known killer. What more do we need to get anxious about catching him?
Johnston starts building a case for a warrant for Kenneth McDuff.
I went with the FBI agent over to the sheriff's office. The lieutenant over homicides said, I don't know, let me call the district attorney. As if he was ordering lunch almost, said, DA says no PC, no probable cause. The FBI agent, he and I looked at one another and both knew better.
And they tell him, look, as we're talking here, he's killing people. And nobody will jump into the fight. So Johnston says, I'm going after him.
So I stuck my nose in it and started asking questions around the sheriff's office. And I learned that one of our bail bond clerks, her boyfriend hangs out with McDuff. And I asked her some questions about her boyfriend and what he did with McDuff. And she said, well, they do this and that, and they get high, and they go, and they what? Oh, they get high, you know, they do some drugs together. And I'm hearing the constitutional basis for federal jurisdiction over a drug case.
McDuff has purchased LSD. Bill Johnson sees his opening here, that he could get a drug warrant. And a DEA agent writes up an affidavit, and Bill Johnson gets his warrant to hunt McDuff on what he says was pretty flimsy evidence.
There was no murder warrant for Kenneth McDuff. All we had was a single tab of LSD. Why would we do that? Because he might be out there killing somebody right now.
Kenneth McDuff had been convicted of the broomstick murders.
A Dallas jury convicted McDuff of shooting the two boys in the head, repeatedly raping Louise Sullivan and choking her to death with a broomstick.
And he is sentenced to die in the Texas electric chair, which in those days was known as Old Sparky. But that's not going to happen. He's going to escape his death with the executioner because of events taking place more than 1,000 miles away in Washington, D.C.
The most important dateline tonight is the Supreme Court. A sharply divided court today ruled 5-4 that the death penalty is illegal in the form in which it is generally used today. This will have an immediate effect on the lives of 600 men and women who have been awaiting execution in 31 states.
And then in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the death penalty in a decision called Furman versus Georgia. In Texas, that meant that everybody on death row, including Kenneth McDuff, who's awaiting his date with the electric chair, their sentences are commuted to life. And now they're eligible for parole.
Now the chair probably will become a relic of the past. This is Don McClellan, WSB News.
I'm sure when the Supreme Court issued Furman versus Georgia in 1972, it occurred to no one that these people who have been convicted of murder, who have been placed on death row, would one day get out.
After getting off of death row, and now his sentence is life, Kenneth McDuff's eligible for parole. Well, he is denied parole 14 consecutive times. Finally, in October of 1989, 23 years after Kenneth McDuff has been sentenced to die in the electric chair for the broomstick murders, McDuff walks out of prison on parole, a free man, off of death row, out of the maximum security unit.
Couldn't believe it. I said, how did he get out on parole? After the murders that he'd already committed, he beat the death penalty. Something's wrong here.
A guy who murders 3 juveniles and rapes the one female, you know, I mean, that guy shouldn't be walking among us.
We know what he had done in the 60s in Fort Worth, Texas, near that baseball field. He was known as the broomstick killer.
And now, with McDuff out on the streets again, Melissa Northrup, the pregnant mother of 2 young children, has just vanished into the dead of night, abducted from the convenience store in Waco, a quick pack.
Now, we don't have all the facts, but we're morally convinced we have most likely a serial killer on our hands. We must do something.
In March 1992, Kenneth McDuff is out of prison, his whereabouts unknown, and a posse of 3 lawmen, Prosecutor Bill Johnston and U.S. Marshals Mike and Parnell McNamara, fear McDuff may have killed again. They are determined to find him.
The boys from Waco, as I call them, are 3 guys who probably should have been born 100 years ago. They have that moral compass of uncompromising views of what is right and what is wrong. They hear Kenneth McDuff is on the loose, and we have a convenience store clerk who's missing. His car was found near the scene of the crime. Other people may or may not have been dragging their feet. Those three boys went out there and they hit the road.
When we got that warrant, we formed up a plan to try to find everyone that ran around with McDuff, his friends, his associates, his criminal associates, and so forth. And that wasn't going to happen from 9 to 5. Those people didn't wake up till 5. You had to be willing to wait till midnight or so to see them stirring around and find them. You're not at the Ritz-Carlton. You're probably at the worst hotels, the worst bars, the worst hangouts, the back alleys, where the prostitutes are active, where the drug dealers are peddling.
Federal Prosecutor Bill Johnson and the McNamara's literally are trolling through the trash of Central Texas, the worst of ex-cons. They're rousting and beating up crack dealers. They've got prostitutes. I mean, it really is a slimy world. And that's where McDuff lived and ran. And those were his friends from prison.
Justification for my presence was we'd be interviewing witnesses which might help prove one or more crimes which could be federal offenses. I did this because I'd seen my father, a state prosecutor, go out with the Dallas County Sheriff off and on, and, you know, I knew that that was commitment versus just having a job. My dad prosecuted all kinds of cases and was involved in the Jack Ruby case and several others. My mom died when I was 7. I idolized my father. But when I was 17, something happened. I worked in a grocery store in Dallas. One night I was supposed to be working. My store was robbed at gunpoint by a meth freak who killed one of our employees, who shot who I would have been. It frightened me, but somewhere in my frightened little person began to burn a desire to stop people from being violent to each other. And what McDuff did to those kids in Fort Worth, go get McDuff. The chance to try to catch a serial killer? Oh my gosh. Who would not, as a law enforcement person or a prosecutor, want the chance to keep someone from killing someone else?
Prosecutor Bill Johnston and U.S. Marshals Parnell and Mike McNamara aren't the only people looking for serial killer Kenneth Allen McDuff. On March 3rd, just days after Melissa Northrup has disappeared, Kenneth McDuff's mother, Addie McDuff, known as the Pistol-Packin' Mama, files a missing persons report with the Bell County Sheriff's Office, which is located just south of Waco. This report lands on the desk of criminal investigator Tim Steglich.
So I received a missing person report on Kenneth Allen McDuff, and so I ran his criminal history and determined that he had been paroled on a 1966 triple murder. It's not uncommon for people that are on parole to take off and have someone report them as a missing person.
This is an old scam. If you're gonna run, if you're gonna break parole and bust out, you'll always have a family member call in and say you've disappeared. And you just hope the police will believe that you're dead.
This is the old McDuff house. So I drove out here to speak with Addie McDuff about her missing son. I started asking Miss McDuff some questions. Mr. McDuff was seated in the living room. She kept alluding to the fact that she was afraid he was dead. I just thought that was not an appropriate response within a couple of days of somebody going missing. Almost like she had been coached into saying something like that. Addie McDuff was doing 90% of the talking. I had to direct everything toward her because if Mr. McDuff started talking, she usually cut him off.
She was just loud and obnoxious. When you go to the FBI's profiling school, one of the things they tell you about is that a lot of these sexually sadistic serial killers, their mother is incredibly overbearing. She's the poster mom for a serial killer's mom.
I asked her to show me around the house to see if I could find anything that might indicate what happened to her son. I'm directed to Kenneth McDuff's room. I find cowboy boots, evidence that he was attending Texas State Technical in Waco, probably doing a lot of metalworking that he had learned in prison. There was a red pickup in the garage. The pickup had a broken windshield on the right side, passenger side. And I'm being pretty guarded. Kenneth had a history of extreme violence. Making sure to keep my back to the wall and watch, although I was reasonably sure he wasn't there, she wouldn't have reported him missing in the first place. Kenneth McDuff had been charged with a triple murder in 1966. However, he paroled in 1989. When I see a history like that, then I know there may be more, and maybe a whole lot more, to the reason a person went missing.
When I arrived here at the Texas State Capitol in 1990, Texas was literally awash in blood. There was a violent crime wave sweeping across Texas. It was splashed across the headlines. Buried in the story is that it was committed by violent inmates out on early parole. And I began asking, how could this be happening? There was no such thing in the state at that time as life without parole. Moreover, because of prison overcrowding, there's a perfect storm going on here.
I wouldn't cage a dog up like they got us caged up right now.
Texas needed to build more prisons. Not just a little bit more, a lot more.
For years, the state defied federal orders to expand the prison system. They didn't want to raise taxes. At the same time, those same members of the legislature are talking tough on crime. So they're instituting longer sentences, but there's no place to keep these people for a long time. I needed to start digging for answers. I arrived at the state capitol to cover the legislature, and it was in session to cover state government. But in the background, I'm starting to dig about what's going on there. They're in this sea of crime, violent crime taking place, and I don't think they pause to say, what's behind this? Nobody seemed to be paying attention except Senator Ted Lyon. He was the chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee. One day, I'm summoned urgently to his office. He's shaking in anger. He has a list of more than 60 former death row inmates who've been released on parole, McDuff among them. But at the top of the list of his concerns is an inmate named Leonardo Lopez. Lopez and his accomplice had taken 5 deputies in Dallas hostage and killed 3 of them. Lyon was especially angry about it because before he went to law school and was elected to the Texas legislature, he'd been a patrol officer in a suburb of Dallas, and he had served warrants with one of the slain deputies. So this was personal.
Fast forward, and I'm the chairman of the Senate Criminal Justice Committee, and I find out that they had just paroled Leonardo Lopez, who had been convicted of killing 3 officers, not just killing them in a gunfight, executing them, having them on their knees and shooting them. Couldn't believe it. I was so upset. I needed somebody that was an ally in the press to go and champion this.
And he says to me, you know, here's the list, you have to do this story.
The parole of police killer Leonardo Lopez outraged the Senate Criminal Justice Committee. Texas Senator Ted Lyon, who chairs...
I do a story, and the story sends a shockwave through the state.
Department of Criminal Justice.
Overnight, every sheriff in the state of Texas is calling the governor. The outrage that hit in the wake of it, Senator Lyon called hearings. And he called to the Capitol the parole board members who had voted to release Leonardo Lopez, the cop killer, to demand an explanation.
It was right here on the Senate floor. I couldn't believe what I was hearing these former, quote, conservative folks saying.
We are raking the bottom of the barrel, Senator. We must let these people go every day. We must let these people go. We have no choice, Senator.
It was a fiery hearing. Senator Lyon at times was yelling at them.
And how many people would he have to kill before you wouldn't let him out? Crude as it might be, Senator, you know we cannot keep everyone. If we see 10 people, we're letting 8 of them go, Senator.
What came out in the hearing, though, that just rocked the world was that under fire from Lyon, one of the parole board members suddenly tells the truth. They have been releasing 150 inmates a day, 750 a week. In the beginning, they were putting the hot check riders out, drug offenses, car thieves, but now they were scraping the bottom of the barrel. And on that bottom of the barrel was Kenneth Allen McDuff.
They can let out 100 people a day, which is what they were doing, but they don't have to let out murderers and rapists and people that kill police officers.
Senator Lyon had James Granberry, the parole board chairman, testify. Granberry had been a Republican candidate for governor in the state of Texas. He was making all these decisions about criminal justice, who gets out of prison in Texas.
Today we want to look at the specifics.
Senator Lyon grills Granberry, I mean skewers him in this Senate hearing. Granberry defends it and he says, we don't have crystal balls. We were doing the best job we thought. They were model prisoners. He has no moral objection at all. He's hoping whatever's happened will go away. And I thought, there is something wrong here. What else are they lying about? What else are they hiding from the public? So I started digging, sifting through the list. There's one person that stands out. Kenneth Allen McDuff. McDuff had committed 3 murders, and no one would ever imagine that he would get out on parole, yet that's exactly what happened. He was paroled in 1989. And the news came as a complete shock to the family of Robert Brand, one of the 3 teenagers that McDuff murdered 23 years earlier in 1966.
When he got out, was paroled, mother called me and she said, your dad, he's got his gun, he's on the way to Rosebud. He was gonna try and find him and end it.
And I went all the way around that McDuff's home down there, boy. I mean, I had plenty of guns, plenty of ammunition, and I had plenty of time to do it. I've never seen a living soul a long time I was down there. Sheriff Pamplin, merciful man, he caught me and took all my guns away from me and sent me home.
We didn't know he got out, but until he came to Rosebud. One day, Kenneth McDuff comes in a convenience store where we always go every Saturday morning to have coffee. He walks in and the owner waits on him and comes back and says, "Did you know who that was?" And we said, "No, who was that?" And he said, "That's Kenneth McDuff. He got out of prison."
My daughter was out running, practicing for a track meet. My wife ran out immediately and hollered at her and told her, "Get in the house, McDuff is loose, McDuff is loose." And I slept with a loaded shotgun by the bedside. It terrorized people.
Everybody was carrying a knife or scissors in the car at night, even my wife.
McDuff had been warned to stay away from Rosebud because those people were afraid of him. They didn't want to see him. They didn't want him around, and yet he decided to go there. He's sitting on a sidewalk, and a few young black males are walking, minding their own business.
He got up and started talking trash to him. He said, "You little black SOBs, y'all think you own the world. Well, you don't." He said, "And I'm here to tell you you don't." Well, he pulls out a knife, and he's following these kids, acting like he's gonna hurt them. He pissed me off. Those kids weren't bothering nobody. And I told him, "You know, we didn't do that around here, and we didn't tolerate it." And I told him he'd put his knife in his pocket and leave.
It's reported, he's arrested, his parole is revoked. He is sent back to the penitentiary.
In 1990, the panel votes to parole McDuff again.
The fact that they let him out not once but twice, there is no excuse for that. I mean, in Rosebud, people all were talking about that maybe Miss McDuff paid somebody off. She had the money and she paid somebody off. Your faith in the system is shaken.
On December 18, 1990, Kenneth McDuff is once more put on the street, free to kill.
When McDuff got out of prison on parole, he, like many, many other of these ex-cons, they're playing the game. They're really trying to con their parole officers. They're trying to show that they're doing the right things and what they should be doing. So McDuff enrolled in a trade school.
McDuff saw it as an opportunity to get a place to live, a place to go, an allowance, and access to young people that he can easily intimidate.
McDuff had spent most of his life behind bars in prison in Texas, so that when he came out in his early 40s, he had the emotional maturity of when he had gone into the prison. It's arrested adolescence.
It is incredible to believe this, but he actually made the dean's list on one of the semesters he attended. And his mama was very, very proud, and she talked about how he was devoted to becoming the mechanic he was supposed to be studying for.
Then during that time period in May of 1991, he got a night job, the graveyard shift, at a convenience store called the Quick Pack.
A man who is married to Melissa Northrup, another convenience store clerk,
who will disappear from her shift almost a year later.
And she was really nice to him. I mean, she would even pack an extra sandwich. She would give him snacks or a sandwich or something like that.
He brags about everything. He could rob any kind of convenience store he wanted to because he worked at one. He understood that there was no security at these places to speak of. There was one young lady in one of those quick packs, Melissa Northrup, a real good-looking young woman. He bragged that he could just take her anytime he wanted to.
He was a natural predator. That was his way. He was on the hunt all the time.
McDuff spends his evenings cruising the Interstate 35 corridor, looking for drug dealers to rob. He's always bragging about he's going to take down crack dealers, steal their drugs and money. He's also cruising a place in Waco called The Cut. It's just right off Interstate 35. It was an open-air drug market and an open-air sex market 24/7. And he came here looking for prostitutes that he could easily pick up. They were transient, nobody would miss them. They would get in a pickup truck with McDuff, and it was the last ride they would ever take. In October of 1989, at least one day after McDuff walks out of prison on parole, a free man, investigators say he killed his first victim, an African-American sex worker named Seraphia Parker. From then on, up and down Interstate 35, bodies are going to start showing up.
Brenda Thompson was a prostitute in that area of Waco. Brenda got in with McDuff. However, something happened pretty quickly. Brenda, through intuition, knew something, and she wanted out. He was huge, and his hands were massive. He could probably kill someone in 5 seconds. Brenda wanted out of that truck.
Brenda Thompson had told her fellow sex workers that if she thought she was ever going to be attacked, she would fight like hell, try to kick the windshield out. She told everybody that.
He was in complete control, and she could do nothing about it. All she could do was kick at the windshield. McDuff came upon a Waco police barricade. They saw Brenda Thompson kicking the windshield of the truck. McDuff continued on, went the wrong way down a one-way street.
Turns his lights out with Brenda Thompson still screaming.
She didn't want to be there. She couldn't get out, and she didn't. She didn't get out. She never got out.
It's been disputed how persistent the police were in chasing him, or if they just wrote it off. It's another sex worker in a dispute with a John. McDuff was living a double life, enrolled in the Texas State Technical College, where he claimed to be studying to be a welder. Well, all the time he's cruising the cut, looking for the sex workers here that he could snatch, rape, and murder.
They started looking at the number of women that were missing and that McDuff was possibly a part of. And it was a big number. It was a dozen or so that they could not account for.
I was on the trail of trying to uncover how all of these violent inmates, plus death row inmates, are getting paroled. Then I got a tip from law enforcement sources that the U.S. Marshals in Waco were searching for triple killer Kenneth McDuff. They think that he is the prime suspect in the abduction of Melissa Northrup, who disappeared in the middle of the night from a Waco convenience store. Waco police suspect that McDuff killed a... So I break a story, and boy, does that shake things loose.
His old cellmate says McDuff randomly abducts any female that appears vulnerable.
Vince, Waco police suspect that...
My story airs on the 10 o'clock news. The next morning, my phone rings. It's Barbara Carpenter. She tells me, I saw the man who murdered my daughter in your newscast last night. She goes on to explain that her daughter, Regina Moore, a sex worker, was last seen alive with Kenneth McDuff in his pickup, and that she had gone to the Waco Police Department. No one really would pay attention to her. I immediately got my crew and we highballed it to Waco. Barbara was a truck stop waitress. We talked to her there. She tells me that months earlier, she and her husband went out to the Texas State Technical College, where McDuff was supposed to be attending trade school, and confronted him. And she said that when she and her husband arrived, there was his red pickup truck with the windshield kicked out. This is the same truck where Brenda Thompson was last seen kicking and frantically fighting for her life. And there it sits. Her husband met us, and we went to the dormitory, to his room, and heard the full account of what she had seen back then. They confront him about her daughter, Regina Moore, and tell him she was last seen with you.
Threw his hands up in the air and started hollering, "Don't pin this on me, don't pin this on me."
A demeanor came over him that frightened him.
And when I saw him in that room, I knew he killed my daughter.
I talked to students that knew him, and then one tells me, McDuff talked to me about abducting a convenience store clerk, and he talked about wanting to kill women. They all thought he was a diabolical, crazy person. Nobody ever reported it to the school. Nobody ever raised the issue with police because they were all afraid of him. And they were scared to death. Barbara Carpenter was telling me, I've been to the police and they wouldn't really listen.
That's not right.
She tells me the only person that is listening to me is Bill Johnston and 2 U.S. Marshals. That's it. Nobody else has paid attention to me. While the McNamara brothers and Bill Johnston are beating the bushes around Waco for any trace of Kenneth McDuff, 100 miles south down Interstate 35, in the Texas state capital of Austin, it's still reeling from 2 unsolved crimes of its own.
The city of Austin was once a quaint college town. In the 1990s, most people considered it safe, a good place to be living.
And there was a lot of freedom. There was a sense of fun. There was a sense of safety. You didn't feel threatened. And very suddenly the headlines changed.
It's considered one of the most violent crimes Austin has ever seen. 4 teenage girls shot, then left to burn in a deliberate fire.
There's a fire at a yogurt shop late at night in an affluent strip mall in northern Austin. And the firefighters discover the bodies of 4 young ladies.
It was stunning. The yogurt shop murder happened where families shopped not too far from the news station where I worked, and it was a crime scene where 4 teenagers had been murdered, and it was a difficult thing to cover.
There was fear because the perpetrators were so violent. Their victims were children, and for that to happen in Austin was unbelievable.
Everybody has children, you know, teenage kids, so that hit home with a lot of people.
Then in late December, another incident occurs that was a shock to the community.
My brother and I were driving my car. He was in the driver's seat, I was in the passenger seat. We wanted to take a left turn onto Powell, a one-way street heading towards 5th Street. As we were about to make that turn, we realized the car was coming the wrong way on Powell, trying to get from 5th Street to 6th Street. As we approached and stopped at that intersection, waiting for that car to clear, that car stopped at that same intersection. The passenger and the driver leaned forward into the windshield of the car, looking left and right to try to figure out what to do next. And that lasted several seconds. They obviously were lost. So they finally decided to take a left on 6th Street in front of us. My brother and I arrived at our destination on Powell. Within a minute or two of us standing there on the porch, we heard a scream coming from somewhere around the car wash that was across Powell Street, just on 5th Street. We saw a car immediately pull out of the car wash and take a hesitant right turn, going the wrong way, going west instead of east on a one-way street east. So I knew immediately it was the same car we had run into before because they were driving as erratically and indecisively as the other car was. Call the police. There's been an abduction, it looks like. We all walked down at that point to the car wash waiting for the police, and we saw the car in the stall that was being freshly washed, abandoned with the door slightly ajar and no one else in sight. When I saw the fresh white suds sitting on the car, that's when I knew something really bad had happened.
And when they investigated it, the woman's purse was in the car. We didn't know where she was. It was an abduction, a kidnapping. The victim was identified as 28-year-old Colleen Reed.
I learned that Colleen was missing on Monday morning. I was working for the city of Austin at the time. Oliver, her boyfriend, fiance, called the office and he asked me, "Do you know where Colleen is?" And I laughed and said, "It's Monday morning, she's at work." He was the one who told me that something had happened and Colleen was missing.
It was just so chilling because the things were so ordinary. The activity, what she was doing, everything about it was so ordinary. It could have been anyone that you know and love.
When that information was released to the public that next day, it was another layer of panic for the citizens. What's going on in this city? All of a sudden, crime is going crazy and we don't know who's doing it, why they're doing it.
One of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life was tell my parents that Colleen was missing. We didn't know where she was.
We're gonna miss you around here.
Colleen was a gentle soul. She cared about other people and animals. She was the kind of person who would pick up the stray dog and bring it home and nurse it back. I could only hope to be half as kind as she was.
Colleen Reed was young. She was beautiful. She had dark hair. She was petite. She had a brand new car that she loved.
Growing up, she's a very kind woman, very gentle. I remember her just being sweet, you know, and unfortunately, one of the last memories is, you know, well, I guess it's fortunate, it's Christmas Day.
Christmas morning had always been a very special time for us, going back to our childhood. And we continued on with that tradition with my children.
Christmas Day, Colleen came over. She brought me and my two brothers Christmas presents. They were super soakers. That was the thing to get. We asked my aunt if we could wash her car with our super soakers. You can imagine, you know, 3 elementary kids with super soakers on a white convertible. And we had fun. It's just muddy streaks all over the car.
We went on with our life until the Sunday after Christmas when it all fell apart. Colleen had spent the morning doing volunteer work, gone to Mass, and had her errands that she needed to run before she went to work on Monday. First, I believe she went to the ATM to deposit the Christmas money from Daddy into her account. And that was the last picture taken of her. And I know she would hate it. But I treasure it.
Colleen Reed then goes to a self-service car wash to clean up her little white sports car that's her pride and joy. It is streaked with mud. Now, this is a busy street in a highly traveled area. This is Austin's 5th Street.
Colleen Reed washing her car on a Sunday night. You just did those things. You didn't think twice about it. That night, the youth of the city lost its innocence.
This came out of nowhere. My baby sister has been kidnapped. And in my mind, I was thinking, what does that word mean? I don't want this to be.
She was gone, so I lived with a lot of guilt. In the back of my head as a little girl, it was, well, if we just would have done a better job washing that car, then she wouldn't have had to have been there that night.
They were just children. I did my best to let them know that I did not think it was their fault, that nobody did, that they had done nothing wrong.
This young woman is snatched from the night. Her car is still in the stall, soap suds rolling off of it, her purse on the front seat, no sign of her.
We deserve to be able to go wash our cars, to run our errands, go to the grocery store in the evening without having to be paranoid.
Colleen Reed's sister, Lori Bible, went on a one-woman crusade to keep the police focused on her sister's disappearance in the case.
Her heart was breaking. Her best friend, her little sister, who she loved so much, was gone. She was worried. That's all she could focus on.
The police's resources were strained and limited. Austin was not prepared to deal with the level of violence that we saw. I had to do something. I could not sit and let the anger eat at me. I had to turn that into action.
I was a TV journalist. I covered a lot of stories. This story I'll never forget. I remember Colleen's sister, Lori Bible, and how she was so relentless keeping this story alive. She did this on her own, by herself, 24/7, going to police, making phone calls, sending out statements, holding news conferences, doing whatever she could to make sure that we didn't forget that something had happened to her sister.
Colleen was a real person with a real life. I couldn't just let that be swept under the rug.
The police were really feeling a lot of heat from her. She's on TV and she's really calling them out. Where is my sister?
The lead detective in this case wasn't getting along with Lori Bible. So one of the things that I was asked to do was mediate. I think I brought a different perspective, some compassion that was lacking really in sort of the male approach to the public in general.
When Sonia was assigned to our case, I finally felt like somebody cared.
Based on the information that we received from the witnesses at the time of the abduction, we had a vague description of the vehicle. The taillights were what stood out.
It really stuck in their memory because it's an unusual car. It's an ugly car. A tan Thunderbird.
We had a description of the two male subjects that were in the car.
They thought that the passenger look was dark and bearded and tan.
So that went to teletype, and it goes to all law enforcement nationwide.
A McLennan County Sheriff's investigator really starts to connect the dots. A missing persons flyer from Austin is landed on his desk. He sees that it's a Thunderbird involved in the abduction of Colleen Reed there. And he puts that together with, okay, we've recovered a Thunderbird near the site of the abduction of Melissa Northrup. And bells go off.
I received a phone call from the lieutenant from McLennan County. A vehicle was found in a parking lot, abandoned, registered to Kenneth McDuff. He said, this is somebody that you should consider in your case as a potential suspect.
Sonia, the new detective, is on the case. She's the one that suspects McDuff is involved in the abduction of Colleen Reed.
I felt like what I was doing really wasn't being looked at or taken seriously, and I felt like this was the answer. This is what we should be looking at. The car in McLennan County is impounded. I've obtained the search warrant to search for my evidence, for Colleen's hair, fibers, everything I could get out of that car. Did McDuff have secrets in the car? When the garage doors opened and I saw the car for the first time, the breath came out of me. It was like, that's it. That has got to be the car. Not only did the taillights match, the color description, light color tan. Also, Kenneth McDuff, who the car belongs to, has the MO to do something like an abduction, a murder, what have you. They actually took a cowboy hat from within the car, and on that cowboy hat was what appeared to be blood. On the back seat of the car, it looked like there had been some type of bodily secretion. That was collected. Items from inside the trunk, clothing, carpet lining from inside the trunk was collected. So once the evidence was collected from the car, we then had to get known samples of Colleen from the family. I called Lori Bible, her sister.
I was a very private person, just an ordinary citizen, and all of a sudden I had police officers all over the place and people in my house, and it was very, very strange.
As a kid, I didn't understand the severity of what was going on. You just see so many people in your house and you're like, wow, what's going on?
Sonia had to collect DNA evidence because the police had not done that. They had not gathered Colleen's DNA.
I asked for personal items of Colleen's, her hairbrush so we could get hair samples, her toothbrush, dirty laundry, anything that she could be connected to. And all of that was taken to the DPS lab to be able to compare it to collected samples from inside the Thunderbird. That takes time to process, to develop the DNA, and to make that comparison.
While Austin homicide detectives work tirelessly to try to discover what has happened to Colleen Reed, back in Waco, the McNamara brothers and federal prosecutor Bill Johnston are searching for any clue as to where serial killer Kenneth McDuff has fled.
We were in Harker Heights. That's an area down near Fort Hood, Texas. We'd heard that Harker Heights may be a good place to look for McDuff, but also look for associates, including a known drug dealer and a friend of McDuff's named Sandy Santos, who hung out in a pool hall down there in Harker Heights. And as we pulled up to the pool hall, it was closing. There was a dark-headed woman that walked somewhat in our direction, and she fit the description of Sandy Santos. We hollered out of the vehicle, "Are you Sandy Santos? Can we talk to you a minute?" She saw they were marshals, and she said, "It's about the girl in Austin, isn't it?" That was 5 hurdles in front of where we were running on the track. She told us that McDuff was running with One-Eyed Jack in Austin, Texas. We knew who that was. We'd prosecuted him, Jackie Pierce.
Think of a really scary-looking prison inmate. You would probably think of somebody who looks like Jackie Pierce. And he was tough. He said he was the baddest ass in the jungle.
Jackie Pierce had walked off early from a halfway house he was supposed to be in, and so we knew him. And Sandy told us that Jackie Pierce had said he and McDuff were in Austin together, and she put 2 and 2 together and thought it had to do with the girl in Austin. Well, that's Colleen.
They tracked Jackie Pierce to Dallas and decided they should get the Dallas SWAT team in case there was resistance or a fight.
So the SWAT team went into the house with a warrant. There was loud noise, hollering, things being broken. Out came this really big guy. It was Pierce. He said, "I just know you didn't come all the way up here and do all this because I walked off from that halfway house."
And when they tell him, he's like, "Give me a polygraph, give me the truth serum, anything. I will clear myself right now. I have nothing to do with McDuff and these murders." But he does help them.
Pierce gave us the hair-raising stories that he was with McDuff 3 months prior in Austin, Texas. It was Christmas Day.
They're looking for places to buy speed and just to do all kinds of other things that they shouldn't be doing, especially as ex-cons.
McDuff saw some teenage girls on roller skates and told Pierce, let's get them and go. And Pierce somewhat forcefully said, I'm not doing that.
Jackie Pierce is alarmed by this. He's not a child abductor.
Jackie was one of the few people who could stand up to and was not impressed with McDuff, because he was every bit as a badass as McDuff ever hoped to be.
And then they left, and he told Jack, we should have just grabbed them. No one would have ever known.
To this day, I'm not sure we know who those two young women are, but they are some of the luckiest young women in Texas.
Pierce told us where they were in Austin. A good stone's throw of where Colleen Reed went missing. It was a familiar area to McDuff. How many serial killers do you think there were in Austin, Texas in December? The kind that abduct strangers and you never see them again. How many drove a tan Thunderbird? I mean, come on. He got Colleen, no question about it.
The irony of this is McDuff is cruising around Austin for victims within blocks of the state capitol, where hearings are being conducted into how did the Kenneth McDuffs of the world get off of death row and get paroled.
If you'd have been on the balcony there in the rotunda and looked out, you'd have seen McDuff's Thunderbird. He was on the prowl within 500 yards of the Capitol.
And literally right under their nose, he's hunting his next victim. At that very point in time, in December of 1991, I'm trying to investigate the parole system and McDuff. How has he gotten out of prison? I got the phone directory for the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. I then got the Austin phone directory, and I began literally going down the list, cross-referencing. I started what I call dialing for sources every night. I'd start with, I want to talk to you about Kenneth McDuff, and it would be an F-bomb and hang up. And I knew I'm onto something. I started knocking on people's homes at night. I wanted to talk to secretaries, administrative people that are handling files. Door after door was slammed in my face, which just reinforced to me, there is something really, really wrong here. Finally, I went to the door of a secretary that worked for one of the board members. I told her who I was, and she said, you shouldn't be here. If I'm seen talking to you, I'd be fired. She did say you're on the right track. I can't tell you anything else. Please do not tell anybody you've talked to me. I walk away like, yeah, keep on going. Someone is going to tell the truth. That effort eventually paid off. I developed sources in the parole system who had access to the parole files. There were a few people in the parole system who were honest, who knew something was wrong, and they wanted to expose it, and they began giving me the files. Those files were confidential under law, not available to the public, would be even difficult for a lawmaker to get hold of. I knew records like this existed, and finally, I hit pay dirt. I struck gold. While I'm digging into the Texas Parole Board and how it came to release McDuff, back in Austin, Detective Sonia Villanueva is stepping up her investigation of Colleen Reed's abduction.
Everyone wanted answers, wanted a quick response, wanted to know if the people who had done this were going to be quickly apprehended.
Sonia was a good detective. She had keyed on McDuff. At the time, everybody was pretty much grabbing at straws. People were wanting results. The media was really wanting results.
Colleen Reed disappeared from this Austin car wash.
Have you seen Colleen Reed? She'd stopped at a money machine just 1/2 hour before the abduction, where a bank surveillance camera took these pictures.
I created this photo lineup and I showed it to the lead detective. I said, look, I've got this person. I want to go show it to these witnesses to either identify McDuff as being part of this or not. It could have gone either way. I went to meet with one of the witnesses, Mike Goins, at their car wash. Mike Goins was the first person that I showed the lineup to. Each photo had a numerical value above them.
And the detective asked me if I recognized anybody on that page.
So he looked at it, he studied it for a minute or two.
And I saw one on the list that I thought reminded me of the person I had seen in the car very briefly in December. So I pointed that person out.
Now, number 3, he didn't know who it was. But number 3, I knew was Kenneth McDuff. When Mike Goins put his finger on number 3, I was jumping out of my shoes. I did the background on McDuff. I already knew that he had the MO to do something like this. I knew that this was big.
The next day, a student at Texas State Technical Institute, the trade school where McDuff is enrolled, is out in the woods nearby. He discovers the remains of a person. The police come to investigate.
Found the body of a black female, 22 years of age.
It's an African-American sex worker, Valencia Joshua, who'd last been seen knocking at McDuff's door at the dorm at this trade school.
She had come down there to turn some tricks, specifically to see him. If you'd look at the graves and all the other stuff, he was lazy. He left her out in the field and just threw some dirt on her. And then when the rains came, somebody's walking across the field and he could see the facial features.
When they were digging up Valencia, I wandered through the mesquite trees and there was another grave. An informant said, oh yeah, sometimes he pre-digged the grave so he knew where to take them. McDuff would be driving down the road with some sucker, and he would say, that would be a great place to put a body. And now he's snatching, taking, abducting, grabbing women all over Texas. Can't let another one suffer that.
The federal prosecutor, Bill Johnston, and the 2 U.S. Marshals, Mike and Parnell McNamara, They're out day and night. They're taking naps in their office, but they're about to run out of gas.
Mike and Parnell just couldn't keep going 24 hours every day. That was really getting tough day after day, week after week. Pretty soon, because of the great work that was showing McDuff to be this menace, the Marshal Service in Washington decided to throw in help and resources.
I received a phone call from my headquarters, which was Washington, D.C., and they said that there was some activity going on in Waco, Texas, and they may need a helping hand.
Danny Stoltz, tough as a boot, funny and smart. His partner, Mike Carnevale, two great marshals who captured Manuel Noriega in Panama, and who helped me on a number of top 15 fugitives.
So I drove to Waco, introduced myself to Parnell and his brother Mike. They were tracking down young girls that were kidnapped, abducted, and murdered. No one believed those guys. They were ringing the bell and nobody was responding. I seen how important it was for the community. The impact of McDuff. One human being in this little town disturbed me. How could this one man have so many people scared?
Stoltz had enough experience to know what was baloney and what was real, and what was overplayed and what was genuine. This was real, and it was urgent. You may have a guy out there killing tonight.
So I called back to my headquarters. I told them, look, this is very important to the community. We have to be involved in it. They said, run with it. You have all our resources.
They send a huge trailer truck up called a Red October, after Tom Clancy's novel, with massive communications in it, and they send dozens and dozens of marshals to support Johnston, the task force.
The full force of both the state of Texas and the federal government is in the hunt for McDuff now.
I requested from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice that they supplied a person as well. McDuff was a prisoner in their custody. He was there for a long time. I needed to know who his crime partners were inside the institution, who he ran around with in the yard, who he was stealing from, on what kind of fight we were in for if we put him in a corner. And they sent out a young man by the name of John Moriarty. He drove up in a convertible white Mustang. The hair about down to his collar. When he walks in, it wasn't that Southern hospitality. He thought he was already invited and this was his house.
He looked like an undercover drug agent from New York City, and he talked like one. He was the only person that ever got a job with the Texas prison system by going undercover in prison to root out a violent situation that existed there. I heard that early on. I was sold on Moriarty.
Everybody thinks all murderers are the same. Well, that's not the case. Oh, this guy was a sexually sadistic serial killer. When we looked at the files right away, we thought it was very unusual that he got out. To see an individual that was on death row twice, to be released, it hadn't happened in the history of Texas, to my knowledge. We start compiling a list of known associates that are either on parole or that he had contact with in the penitentiary that were out. because that's who usually they'll go to and would be more than likely to assist them.
Once we got everything situated, we said we're going to stop looking for the bodies. We're going to start looking for the man that put the bodies there. Our main focus was the fugitive.
McDuff is a very violent man. In my opinion, I would describe him as being an animal. The brutal way of killing people just really turns my stomach.
We put people all over East Texas, in Central Texas, in areas where we figured that McDuff would frequent. We interviewed hundreds of people. One of the persons that I had a kick interviewing was his mother.
The marshals and Moriarty pay a visit to Addie McDuff's home.
We advised Addie while we were there. She cooperated, but she was becoming agitated. She finally said, you know, don't hurt Junior, don't hurt Junior, which is just a bizarre statement.
The mother was foul-mouthed and mean. Don't do to Junior, don't frame him like you did the last time.
And they're looking at each other. A grown man, you're calling him Junior?
She had no remorse about any other family except hers. The raping, the killing, she would not say anything negative about her son. And I have had mothers and fathers tell me where their son is just because it was the right thing to do. Addie wouldn't budge.
Sitting parked out front in this rural area is the red pickup with a new windshield in it. The same pickup described where Brenda Thompson was last seen in the passenger seat, kicking for her life into the windshield.
The windshield was repaired and a receipt was located.
The father was in the garage, J.A. McDuff. One of the deputies asked him, do you know where Kenneth is, Mr. McDuff? You help us find him? I don't know where he is, he said. As far as I'm concerned, you can kill him if you find him.
Well, the old man, I'll never forget, he turns to me and he says, it's kind of like having a dog. You know what they're doing when you're there, but you don't when you're not there. It was like, wow, the old man knows. He knows.
And about that time, Addie walked into the doorway and said, shut up, you old fool. Get in here with the rest of us.
I think Mr. McDuff knew that Kenneth was guilty of the killings in 1966. He would not say it, but I think that he knew that we were on the right path.
Bill Johnson and the U.S. Marshals are beating the bushes where all the ex-cons hang out, the bars that they hang out in. And they hear that one of the people that associates with McDuff is Alva Hank Worley. Tim Steglich finds out that Worley's got a court appearance, a child custody hearing in his county.
So I went to the courthouse the next day. I contacted Hank, who verified he did associate with Kenneth McDuff, but he hadn't seen him in several days. Hank's kinesics were a little off. He was fidgeting, standoffish. I couldn't really tell if he knew anything. At this point, I didn't think that Hank was directly involved in any particular offense. I just thought that he might have some knowledge of something that had occurred.
McDuff didn't always have a stooge or a second, but sometimes he wanted to. In the Fort Worth killings, Roy Dale Green was that man. We thought Alva Hank Worley might give us the person that was with McDuff in Austin in the time frame when Colleen was abducted. Alva Hank Worley's a part-time construction worker. He lives at a place called Bloom's Motel off the interstate. Nasty, filthy. We went there and found Worley. And then we found him again and again. And we made a practice of talking to him because we thought he might be important.
He's living there with his 14-year-old daughter. Johnston and the marshals, they're rolling through the parking lot of Bloom's at night. They're shining their big bright spotlight into Worley's hotel room windows. They're knocking on the door. They're doing it at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a tactic they call driving them up. You know, if we can inflict enough insomnia, maybe they will let down their guard.
Mike McNamara would talk to Worley about things like his daughter. We got to get McDuff. Worley, think about your daughter. Is your daughter safe around McDuff?
The marshals and Johnston were the bad cops. Meanwhile, Tim Steglich was doing the good cop routine.
He was getting it from all sides. I kept telling Hank, I said, if you have something to tell me, just tell me. I said, and we'll go from there. I said that on many occasions. And then I just wouldn't leave him alone. I would drive through Bloom's parking lot, and I think it just finally got to him. There were several agencies that were driving through there and putting a lot of pressure on him.
That was the idea, try to see if there was some button that could be pushed that might lead to some action. And it did.
I had received a call from Hank's sister stating that he really needed to talk to me. Traveling to Bloom's motel, pulled up to about this point where I had a good line of sight on the apartment that Hank Worley was renting at the time. He was outside with his teenage daughter, about 14. Hank walks over to my car and he opens the passenger side door. And I knew he's going to confess to something. And I said, Hank, what have you got? And Hank said, I was with McDuff when he took that woman from the car wash.
For more than a month, law officers in Central Texas hunt for twice-parole serial killer Kenneth McDuff. Their search leads them to Bloom's Motel, a run-down dump of a place where a lot of ex-cons live. And one of its residents is Alva Hank Worley, the running mate, the buddy of Kenneth McDuff. Worley has reached out to Sheriff's investigator Tim Steglich, and what he has to say is about to blow the case wide open.
Hank needed someone to talk to. Hank was having a hard time sleeping. The demons were coming out, so to speak.
Maybe because he had his daughter staying with him at the time and his conscience got to him.
Tim had spoken with Hank, knew him. So Tim was the guy. He's the one that made it all happen.
That moment when Hank Worley told me he was with McDuff when the woman was abducted has always stuck in my mind. I said, Hank, you need to stop talking. He said, can I go tell my daughter goodbye? Hank knew that he may be going to prison for a very long time. And I think he wanted to tell her that he might not be back.
Steglich took him back to the Bell County Sheriff's Department, took him into a room and began to talk to him. And took the first statements.
Even though Tim was angry about the murders, the girls, the rape, Tim was able to get his personal feelings, put them aside, and knew the bigger picture.
I needed to maintain my composure because I knew it was going to be a very long night and probably a long month and longer than that. Hank Worley was confessing to the car wash kidnapping.
My name is Alva Hank Worley. I'm 34 years of age.
What was unusual about this, you had the great white shark of serial killers, Kenneth McDuff, but he had an accomplice.
Back in December, about 2 or 3 days after Christmas, Kenneth McDuff picked me up at my sister's house.
You have a first-hand account of how one of these guys operates and what he does to his victims, and you rarely ever get anything like that. And when you see it and hear it, it's unthinkable. It is unthinkable acts.
We decided to go to Austin and get some coke or crank. The only place I knew to get that was near the university.
Hank Worley was very jumpy. He was not able to sit still, especially when he started detailing the abduction.
McDuff drove downtown instead of going to the campus. I did not ask him why. Mike drove down 6th Street and he drove around the car wash. That is near 6th. He drove around the car wash twice. I noticed someone washing their car in one of those bays. This was the only person at the car wash. Mike pulled into one of the bays facing the main road. I thought he was going to wash the car and get rid of the empty beer bottles. Mike did not say anything. He just got out of the car, walked over to the next stall, where the only person was at the car wash. I heard his voice, but I could not hear what he said. Immediately after I heard his voice, Mike came back. He had a girl by the throat, and her hands behind her back.
He did have the biggest hands I have ever seen on a human being.
I could hear her gurgling, and she was pleading with him. She was saying, "Please, not me, not me."
McDuff used one of his hands to grab her by the head and lift her off of the pavement.
She was kicking back, but her feet were off the ground.
And I can only imagine what it must have been like for Colleen to have gone through such a thing.
He had left the driver's side door open, and he carried her to that side of the car. He was having trouble getting her in the back seat. And I'm not sure if I helped him put her into the car, but I might have. She was saying, "Please let me go. Please don't let this happen to me." Mike told me to hold her. I got in the back seat, I held her wrists and pushed her against the side of the car. As we left the parking lot of the car wash, Mike went the wrong way on the street that runs in front of the car wash. She was telling me not to let him hurt her.
Worley was like a chihuahua on meth. And so I kept everything very simple. I talked to him directly, but not threatening. And that seemed to work with Hank.
Tim put his arm on him and just gave him a good squeeze, which made Worley feel, I have a cohort here, and he dropped his guard even more so.
Mac kept north on the interstate till about Round Rock and pulled over on the shoulder of the interstate. He got into the back seat with the kid and he told me to drive. Mike hit her several times in the head when he first got in with her in the back seat. He took off all his clothes. I think he laid her down and got on top of her. She scratched Mac's eyes. He said she tried to hurt me real bad. He slapped her and she said, okay, okay. Mac tied her hands behind her. He used a white string or cord. He lit a cigarette and he put it on her and in her. She made a real agonizing moan when he did that. He made some threat to her about not acting right.
I'm trying to get it out, but I'm really having a hard time believing that anyone would be that brutal. McDuff burned Colleen Reed on the genitals. That really set me off. I couldn't believe anybody could do something like that. And I knew that Hank was probably telling the truth, and I needed to keep rolling as fast as I could and as accurately as I could, because he probably wouldn't make something like that up.
Mike told me he is going to use her up. He then said he was going to get rid of the girl. This surprised me. Mike told me to watch where in the hell I was going, and I swerved. I pulled over on the service road just north of Amity, and Mike told me to get in the back. I did this and Mike drove. I tried to settle the girl down, and she told me to stay in there in the back to keep Mac away from her.
Colleen Reed begged Worley to help her be protected from McDuff. I think that Worley was not quite as violent with her, if he was violent at all, and she thought if there was a chance that this man can help me.
At what point should Worley say, hey, let's stop this and let's not torture this young lady? He wanted to be involved as much as McDuff did, or he would have done something. He was looking for enjoyment himself.
I took off all of my clothes. I finished having sex with her by the time we got to Belton, and I had my clothes back on by the time we got to 6th Street exit. Mike drove north on Highway 317, several miles. He turned to the right on a gravel road. He told me it was the old road that ran to his daddy's house. I stayed in the back seat with her. She stayed pretty calm with me back there with her.
Hank starts painting himself as the savior at that time. You know, I told her, just don't worry, I'm gonna take care of you, I won't hurt you, don't worry about it.
Worley was a follower, a drunk, a lost soul. He was there, and he allowed this to happen.
He could have gotten out of that car. He could have done something as a human to try to help Colleen survive. I mean, but he didn't.
He could have called the police. He could have done any number of things.
And so he really deflected all responsibility for what happened that night to McDuff.
He was weak. He was just a weak guy. He wanted to run with the big dogs, and then when he got through with the big dogs, he wished he had never seen a big dog.
Mac got out and reached in the car and grabbed her by the hair and dragged her out. He didn't say anything. He put her on her knees. He pulled his pants down to about his knees. And I'm not sure, but I think she did something to make him mad. He said, "I'll kill you, bitch." He pulled his hand all the way back behind himself. And he hit her so hard I could hear a loud crack. It almost sounded like a big tree breaking. And I'm sure she broke her neck. She didn't move at all. Her whole body was limp. I think she was dead at that point.
You just can't imagine that kind of brutality. To be choked and raped and beaten. She had, you know, no way of fighting somebody of that strength and that size and that evil.
I had been standing at the back of the car on the driver's side. Mac was out of control. I could not believe what he had done. I told him he should have let her go. He reached back in the car and got a cigarette and my lighter. He had a good fire on the end of it, and he put it in her. He did that 3 or 4 times. She did not move or scream. Every time he did that, he'd take a hit off of the cigarette to get a good fire on the end of it. The last time he put the cigarette in her, I did not see the cigarette after that. Mike picked her up by the hair and walked over to the trunk and put her in it. She did not make any noise at all. Mike told me we were in this together and I'd better keep my goddamn mouth shut. All the way back to my sister's house, I did not hear any noise from the trunk or the back of the car. Then he said he needed a shovel to get rid of her. I knew he was gonna bury her.
I had never heard anything like that before. This investigation was so intense. I wanted to get this thing done, get McDuff into custody, and make sure that these people cannot do it again.
After we heard Worley tell what happened, you never got past that. No one did. The thing about McDuff that we now know with horrible detail, the worst part of being grabbed by McDuff is not being killed by McDuff. That's where it leads, but the inevitability of it, forerun by torture, is what, to me, set McDuff apart. It remains the worst thing I've ever heard one human do to another, and it's the most horrifying, nightmarish thing I've ever heard.
To hear that kind of torture, it really shakes you to the core.
Sonia is the one who broke some very bad news to me. She had to tell me what happened. And I would often just shut her down and just say, I can't hear it. I can't digest it. And I sure don't know how I'm going to tell my parents.
Lori knew at that time that Colleen was not alive. There was a glimmer of hope, And after she heard that from Hank Worley, his words, she knew her sister was gone.
Worley believed McDuff dumped Colleen's body in a field near his parents' home. Police search the area and find nothing. But some of the details of Worley's confession leak out to the media in Austin.
There's still some argument about who was responsible for that at the Austin Police Department. We were appropriately shocked.
Hank Worley told how he and McDuff went to Austin to buy drugs, kidnapped 29-year-old Colleen Reed. Both Worley and McDuff raped her. Worley said they eventually ended up here on Texas 317 north of Belton. According to Worley, he knew the woman was destined to die when McDuff said he was going to use her up. The search ended Saturday morning. No body found here.
Kenneth McDuff is on the loose. There didn't seem to be an effort to prepare the general public for the sheer terror of this story. It just came out.
The outrages, over the top. People are calling on the governor to do something. How is this man out of prison? How could this happen? And now Ann Richards, who certainly didn't come in on a law and order agenda or anything, she is really feeling the heat that something's got to be done.
Suddenly we are confronted with the fact that someone accused of kidnapping and murder was released from the penitentiary. In our minds, should never have been released.
In late April, a few days after Hank Worley's blood-chilling confession, another body shows up. A fisherman hooks a corpse in a flooded gravel pit in southern Dallas County, about 60 miles from Waco.
Last night, police found the body in this southeast Dallas County gravel pit.
Two fishermen walked up and saw what they thought was a body submerged in the water right here. The back was on the surface, floating face down.
When he put his boat in, he went down a little channel where the river Willers was on each side, and he got about 30 foot, and he seen his body laying there.
The immediate suspicion is that it's Melissa Northrup, the pregnant mother of two young children who had been abducted from the convenience store in Waco at Quick Pack because her car had been found abandoned about 2 miles away. But it would be the next day until she was formally identified.
We do have a positive identification on the body. It is that of Melissa Ann Northrup.
Melissa Northrup's body had been in the water for a long time, so it was really difficult in forensics to determine what had happened to her. But it must have been a horrific ending for her life because McDuff was in to see his victims suffer. There were ligatures on her wrist and on her ankles, tied with shoestrings in the same manner that inmates are known to use in murders. John Moriarty, the prison investigator, when he saw that, he thought, that's McDuff's signature. This is his doing. So that just sent a wave of anger through Waco.
There's no reason he should be out. If he was given life, why is he out? My daughter is 22 years old. To me, that wasn't her fulfillment of life at 22.
Hurts. But you know, I'm kind of relieved. I know she's not out there. She's not hurting. She's it's over.
You see things on TV that happen to people, but you never dream about it happening to you.
The horrible murders were so terrible that everybody, whatever gear they were in, they found another gear. There had been many people, many officers who had talked to different people throughout the case. McDuff's family, McDuff's acquaintances, people he ran with, people he used to know. Nothing was turning up that he was there. We thought he might be there, but it didn't look like it.
He was gone. No sign of him. We're taking the perspective maybe he already skipped out of Texas.
And the marshals got substantially involved at a national level. The Marshal Service at that time had developed a wonderful relationship with a couple of national programs that helped catch fugitives.
So it was our decision that we contacted American Most Wanted.
On May 1st, Texas lawmen asked for your help in finding Kenneth McDuff when we profiled his case on America's Most Wanted.
The families of those murder victims pray for the capture of McDuff. Tonight, your call could end the manhunt.
On May 1st, America's Most Wanted broadcast a report about the nationwide manhunt for Kenneth McDuff, talking about his victims. His mugshot and pictures are in there. 2 days later, an employee of a sanitation company calls local police in Kansas City and says, the man in the report, Kenneth McDuff, resembles somebody that works on one of the trash trucks here. That man is going by the name of Richard Fowler.
Sergeant J.D. Johnson is a Kansas City patrolman. He checked records and discovered police arrested Fowler less than a month ago for soliciting a prostitute in Kansas City's red light district.
It's a misdemeanor, slap on the wrist, but they took fingerprints.
So, Johnson, with the help of our hotline, contacted Deputy Richard Straub in Waco, Texas. Straub faxed McDuff's fingerprints back to Kansas City.
We were working like dogs around the clock, and we had nothing to indicate that he was in Kansas City. You know, it was kind of out of the blue.
The prints for Richard Fowler came in. As we look at the fingerprints and comparing them to McDuff, it was, my God, here he is.
There was no doubt it was him.
The party McDuff and the party Fowler were in fact the same party.
It's not done till he's in handcuffs. It's not done till he's behind bars. But there was a good feeling to know that finally we got a break. We got him.
He was living in a kind of a rooming house, an old house, and I think his roommate was another murderer. And he said McDuff was crazy. Told one of the investigators he thought McDuff was crazy.
Sergeant Johnson knew McDuff worked as a trash collector, so he and 5 other officers set a trap to haul McDuff in.
We knew that the trash truck would have to pass by this area on the way to the landfill.
Now, McDuff's considered armed and dangerous. He's been on death row. They're expecting possible shootout, resistance, what have you.
We used the ruse of a commercial enforcement vehicle to get McDuff stopped without having to use red lights and siren. That way we totally surprised him. There was no opportunity at all for him to become aggressive.
And McDuff gives up immediately. There's no resistance. He gives up.
And that's what did McDuff in by getting the job, by exposing, lifting his head up. He needed his beer, he needed his drugs, and he needed a place to sleep and eat. If he would have just stayed low and depended on everybody else fending for him, it would have been a little rougher.
There's something congruent about that, in my opinion, that he ended up being arrested while picking up garbage.
And once he's taken into custody, the Marshal Service scrambles one of its jets to go to Waco to pick up the key investigators in the case. They all board this jet and they head to Kansas City.
The nationwide manhunt is over. A Texas parolee wanted for questioning in a string of murders is now under arrest.
Tonight, the people in this Central Texas community are relieved that McDuff is behind bars.
Thank God.
just thank God nobody else can be hurt. Because there's a lot of mothers out there, they're looking for their daughters. And I know how they feel, you know. And I pray for them, I do.
We are all very, very happy that this person has been taken off the streets. He can go and kill no more.
U.S. Marshals led a massive 7-week manhunt for McDuff.
All of us here are husbands. We have wives, we have daughters, we have sons. It's a relief that this man is not out there doing what he's suspected of doing.
So the next morning, they bring him back to Waco.
It was odd being on the plane with him because we had heard the details of the bad things he'd done, and now seeing in the flesh the creature that did these things, it was like seeing a grotesque monster.
The U.S. Marshal, Parnell McNamara, is sitting on the jet, and he's staring at McDuff. But he said for a split second, I wanted to kill him myself. I'm gonna throw that door open, I'm gonna throw him out at 35,000 feet. Who will care? And then he came back to his senses.
We had to regroup, and I had to explain to everybody that was still working on the team, our job has changed. No matter what we think and no matter what we feel, this man now has to be protected. It's our obligation to make sure he's safe.
A U.S. Marshal Service jet returned suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff to Waco under heavy security.
All of the media are there, newspapers, radio. It is a huge media gaggle and event. I mean, there are cameras everywhere, and it's a big, big story.
And when the door opened off the plane, my thought was, good Lord, be ready, because I hope that there was no one out there with a high-powered rifle.
The 46-year-old parole killer of 3 Fort Worth teenagers in 1966 wore chains and leg irons. Authorities want to question McDuff about the abductions and murders of a dozen Texas women.
McDuff looks a little gaunt and thin. He's wearing a white t-shirt. He's wearing Green Army fatigue pants. And he comes walking beside me.
Did you kill anyone, Mr. McDuff?
Law.
You know Melissa Northrup?
He snarled at me and said, no. And he gets into one of the patrol cars, then they certainly didn't want this guy to get away again.
He was a big man. He was a strong man. He was a coward. McDuff was a coward. He wouldn't fight me, but he would go after desperate women, young women that were weaker. McDuff was nothing but a predator. And when you put him in a corner with someone that's gonna whip his ass, he's a coward. Simple as that.
Meanwhile, downtown on the lawn of the federal courthouse, where McDuff is going to be taken, hundreds of people have gathered. The Marshal Service is receiving intelligence that he's going to be killed before he gets there, that there's such anger in the community. They're going to try to take him from the marshals and kill him. And so there's heavy, heavy security. I grab my camera crew and literally speed a back way to the federal courthouse, and I've arrived there before they're to get there. And I'm standing in the middle of Melissa Northup's relatives, sister-in-laws and sisters. When that door opens and McDuff steps out with those officers, the crowd explodes in anger.
Did you kill Melissa Northrup?
Colleen Reed! Melissa Northrup, you bastard! Vengeance is mine! Save the Lord! He's gonna get you!
I remember thinking to myself, this was the closest I've ever seen to a lynch mob. They wanted him so bad. I mean, he was absolutely hated up there.
when you hear the wails of the family members and the screaming, it was troubling. It was unsettling. That's what it was. It was just unsettling.
The marshals were really emotionally torn by this. They've got their man in custody, and they've got this crowd that wants to hang him. How they've been hunting for this man high and low and seen what he did to people, and now they have to protect him from frontier justice.
Mr. McDuff, you have anything to say about the charges against you?
The story behind the abduction of Melissa Northrup had been reported over and over and over again, and it scared people. They also were aware of what had happened to Colleen Reed, in addition to the reporting that had taken place from what had happened way back in 1966. So all of these emotions boiled over, and they were angry, and they were screaming and yelling. It was a very frightening thing.
McDuff's attorney made clear that the accused killer does not want to talk to police.
McDuff returns to federal court here on Friday for an evidence hearing. Prosecutors say then they will reveal more information about his role in alleged killings. Sources say that the search of McDuff's Kansas City, Missouri apartment has yielded evidence in some of the cases, and that McDuff was trying to buy a gun and slept with butcher knives under his pillow.
After I did my last newscast that evening, everybody had left. Somebody came down and said, the marshals would like to see you up in their office in the federal courthouse. And I went up to the office. Lots of marshals in there and other investigators, very quiet. Parnell McNamara has got this big wood frontier-style desk, and he leans across it and he said, I want you to read something. And he slides it across the desk. He said, this is the confession by Hank Worley, McDuff's accomplice in the murder of Colleen Reed. I'm not supposed to give it to you. You can't take it with you. But I want you to read it. And I sat there and read it.
Mac grabbed her by the hair and dragged her out. He had a girl by the throat. I could hear her gurgling. He lit a cigarette. He put it in her. He hit her so hard I could hear a loud crack like a big tree breaking.
This was horrific. This was unthinkable. I mean, it really took the breath out of me. And I could tell Parnell McNamara kind of had tears in his eyes. Like, whoa. And he leaned across that desk and just with his finger on that desk, tapping it, said, Robert, we got him. We've done our job. Now, by God, you get out there and you do your job. And you tell us how this monster got out of prison.
This is suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff after tips led to his capture in Kansas City, Missouri. He now stands accused of killing at least 6 young women in Texas since his parole 3 years ago.
When I saw him getting off that plane, I thought, this is a relief. People are safe now.
McDuff was the epitome of evil. Everybody knew it.
This was a mean, mean man that should have never seen the light of day again. And he made a lot of people miserable. They will be that way to their dying days.
McDuff's alleged accomplice in the abduction of Colleen Reed from an Austin car wash last December says McDuff planned to kill the young woman after they sexually assaulted her. Reed's body has not been found. Last week, police found the body of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup in a southeast Dallas gravel pit. Police suspect McDuff abducted Northrup from the Waco convenience store in March, where she worked as a clerk.
No woman, no person should have to feel what those young women went through. My heart breaks for all.
McDuff's the convicted murderer who in 1966 was sentenced to die in the Texas electric chair in the slayings of 3 Fort Worth teens.
He was given the death penalty, but it was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, commuted to life, and then he was paroled in 1989.
Sources tell me that prison psychiatrists determined that McDuff was dangerous. And so tonight the question remains, why did the parole board turn Kenneth McDuff loose on society?
After a nationwide manhunt, serial killer Kenneth McDuff is arrested in Kansas City and brought back to Waco. It's there that U.S. Marshal Parnell McNamara challenges me to find out how this monster got out of prison. What Marshal McNamara didn't know is that I was already on the case. And he introduces me to prison investigator John Moriarty. Moriarty has McDuff's confidential prison files, and I've had sources leak to me McDuff's confidential parole files. Together, we're about to expose a level of corruption in the Texas parole system that no one could possibly imagine. I'm out beating the bushes, trying to talk to parole staff, and I had found out the corruption was so deep in the parole system, run by parole board chairman James Granberry. Granberry had been the mayor of Lubbock years back. He had made a name for himself in Republican circles and ran for governor in 1974. He is rewarded for his work by Republican Governor Bill Clements. Clements names him to the parole board. He was selling his influence back with the other parole board members and all, and soliciting family members, claiming that he could get them out early on parole if they would just pay him.
There were lists that came out on releases about who was going to be released this week, that type of thing. Granberry would reach out to the individual whose family was on the outside and shake them down for a fee.
He was mailing letters to inmates' families that were scheduled to get out already. They didn't know it. This poor African-American woman who is working 3 jobs to support herself and support her family, her son is automatically going to be released, but they've targeted her. She gets a letter from Granberry telling her, I can get him out early, but it's $500. She pays the money. They were corrupt to the core that they had people working in the prisons everywhere finding these people to target. He was going back to his cronies on the board and getting them to approve the parole and spreading the money around.
During Granberry's investigation, we found that Granberry had received 2 vehicles from the father of a parolee for getting him released. When you look at the big picture, you know, you've got parole board members that are out there running amok, shaking down people for money. It was evident that they were selling paroles. And it's always cash, of course. I mean, there ain't no checks written for this kind of stuff. Dr. James Granberry would collect that money.
I interviewed Granberry about these allegations.
At least one inmate's family received a contract from Granberry with a bill for his consulting fee written on a parole board memo pad.
Is that appropriate to be using your old memo pads?
I don't even have any of those anymore.
No?
You see, this just says board member.
Right.
Yeah.
How would they have that?
I don't have any idea.
They said you mailed it to. Came with some contractual stuff that explained you weren't an attorney, that you, do you send out stuff like that?
Yeah, there were a few cases I did early on, yes, I did. Make sure that I'm not an attorney. Told I was not an attorney and that I certainly couldn't guarantee any results.
We're doing a deep dive into McDuff's file. We see that the attorney for McDuff, a guy named Jackson, and Granberry are friends. They grow up together. Another red flag.
Granberry actually called him while he was reviewing the file to decide how to vote. That's improper right there. He withdrew out of a conflict from voting on the case because of that relationship. But when there is a vote, it looks like McDuff's not going to get approved. Granberry steps in after recusing himself from voting earlier and casts the vote that lets McDuff out. McDuff gets in trouble when he's out on parole. He goes back to prison. Who steps back in to get him out? Granberry intervenes again. No one would ever know. They could never be held accountable because it was all hidden in the file. And I have that file when I interviewed James Granberry.
Thinks that you were set up.
You stood between Kenneth McDuff and...
No, let's get this. I didn't approve his parole. I merely continued his parole planning. And there's a big difference.
But you could have stopped.
Honored.
You could see it on camera. Their mouth goes dry. I called it cotton mouth.
Everybody else had already voted. Their vote was
Henry
set.
King.
He's lying through his teeth.
I guess I could if I'd voted the other way. We could have stopped it.
I owned the interview then because I knew more about him and what he had done than he could even remember. Finally, I put it to Granberry. How could you override the other parole board members and set this monster free?
But I don't have a crystal ball, and I didn't know what the fellow was going to do. In my opinion, he'd be a useful citizen.
Granberry had said that he voted to release McDuff, that he was a model prisoner. Well, here in the file, buried in the file, McDuff earlier had attempted to bribe a commissioner in the parole system, had told him there's $10,000 can be in the glove box of your car. My dad's got money. Just vote me out. It's all in the file, and that file becomes their undoing.
McDuff had a reputation here.
Then I started releasing my investigative reports on television night after night, for week after week. And the stories were so shocking that there would be this level of corruption in the system. It was an earthquake across the state of Texas in law enforcement, in the public, certainly in the legislature.
Texas Senator Ted Lyon, who chairs the Criminal Justice Committee, plans to launch an investigation into why the parole board freed Kenneth McDuff.
Senator Lyon, in the wake of my investigative reports, he called a hearing and summoned Granberry to testify.
We know Granberry voted to let McDuff out after the first capital murder convictions. That whole system back then was just corrupt as it could be. I had no idea what was going to come out of that hearing. I didn't know what they were going to say.
Have you been helped by any of the staff at the Board of Pardons and Paroles in obtaining information on clients or potential clients in order to solicit them to pay you money to help get them out of prison?
I instruct Mr. Granberry to assert his privilege.
Granberry refused to answer the committee members' questions a total of 16 times.
It set a record in the state for the number of times that James Granberry took the fifth against self-incrimination.
Granberry had an opportunity to tell his side. This guy was the chairman of the Texas Parole Board. People needed to know what was going on, what happened, how did this happen? And he chose not to tell it.
What was always shocking to me is here's a guy that had run for governor of Texas. He had plenty of money. And then he set up this cheap way to make money off these people's family to help murderers and rapists get out of prison. Why he ever did that, I don't know. I mean, you have to be really desperate to do that.
Heartless, no ethics, no morals. How could he do that? How could any of them take money and release someone who may well have victimized one of their children or grandchildren? How could you do that?
The Criminal Justice Committee set up a long table in the center aisle of the Senate chamber. Parole board members who had voted on the McDuff case were also summoned before Lyons Committee. One of them, Cora Mosley, admitted that she voted for him and didn't even open the file.
And the question that I have is, and I want to make sure that this is very clear, there is an absolute possibility that you didn't even review this file.
There's a possibility.
Lori Bible, who had become this champion for her murdered sister. There was this moment in the hearing that she sat down beside Cora Mosley
And I said, "Is that my sister's blood on your hands?" And her head did a swivel, and she looked at me, and she got out of that chair so fast.
And law enforcement all were sitting all around there. They all wanted to get up and applaud. They were like, what a moment.
Anyone that put themselves in a position of authority and then failed to use the authority to protect us, they have destruction on their hands. They have the pieces and fragments and dripping remains of these lives that have been torn to pieces.
In January of 1993, 8 months after McDuff was arrested in Kansas City, he goes on trial for the capital murder of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup, the Waco convenience store clerk. Because of pre-trial publicity, the trial is moved from Waco to Houston. Public interest in the case is overwhelming, and the media coverage is massive.
That was the biggest news crowd that I had ever seen. There were cameras, there were people, you almost had to wade through it.
I was sent to cover this trial in Houston. There was a little bit of a media circus. Every morning, we would gather outside the courthouse. He'd walk across the street, and we'd all shout out our questions.
Are you innocent, Mr. McDuff?
I'd like to get an impartial trial.
You think you can get a fair trial here?
Don't look like now with all this news media.
He looked like he didn't think he belonged there, and he was not happy to be there. But I never saw anything that looked like remorse.
It was a difficult case because no one saw McDuff commit the murder. We had evidence that put him at the scene where Melissa Northrup was abducted, where her body and car were found. But nobody actually saw him do the crime, so it's a circumstantial case. We called Addie McDuff, McDuff's mother, as one of our first witnesses. She had given him a credit card, and that credit card was used in the quick pack where Melissa Northrup was kidnapped from. Addie McDuff was just in total denial that he had done anything ever bad in his life. And society was just unjustly picking on her poor son.
And I hurt for them people, but my son didn't do it.
There have been a lot of accusations. They say your son is a serial murderer, that he's a cold-blooded killer, and that he would just kill people for the fun of it.
Well, if he's doing all that, I don't know how he went to school and made good grades. He'd been busy killing. He has never killed nobody.
McDuff is just a piece of shit, in my opinion. And his mother is too. And his father is for not sitting him down and spanking him when he was younger. They allowed this to happen. So McDuff's mother, father, and McDuff can all kiss my ass. How's that?
It is a case rife with contradiction.
You know, the way they were defending him, he was defiant, his family was defiant, and his lawyers were on his behalf, condescending in some respects to the state's case. Oh, this is a bunch of junk.
And it is replete with judgments made not according to evidence, but according to prejudice and hatred of one man, Kenneth Allen McDuff.
And I thought, oh my gosh, don't tell me he's going to get away with this.
In a trial, normally, a defendant is only tried for the crime that he is charged with. But there are exceptions to that.
You told people that evening that all...
We wanted to introduce the evidence of the kidnapping of Colleen Reed there in Austin so the jury can make the comparison. Alva Hank Worley was a witness to that and testified about it.
Worley was a star witness, and he recounts what happened.
It was brutally difficult to endure. My first thought was about the family members who were present.
This was evil beyond anything any of us could comprehend. What happened to Colleen is beyond our comprehension.
The most chilling thing was what I heard in court about Colleen Reed. When he picked her up and carried her to his car, and she was yelling, "Not me, not me, not me." And I thought, she knew at that moment that she had met her end. And I just never was able to shake that. I think the minute Kenneth McDuff laid his hands on any of his victims, they knew what was going to come next. And they prayed for either freedom or they prayed to be taken immediately. Nothing good was going to follow.
McDuff insists on taking the stand in his own defense and gives this rambling, almost cross-examination of himself, how he didn't do it, how he wasn't there. It was laughable. You could see through it so easily.
You don't always know about how a jury is reading things, but after the recess, all of the women had moved to the back of the jury box. They wanted to be as far away from him as they could possibly get. That was a pretty strong reaction of what they thought of him.
The jury comes back with the verdict in 4 hours.
The jury decided to find him guilty. We went to the punishment phase of the trial.
By now, Texas and more than 20 other states had reinstated the death penalty, following new guidelines set down by the U.S. Supreme Court allowing them to do so.
Even before deliberations started, McDuff told reporters he knew he would be sentenced to death.
Are you afraid? Oh, I guess they might be afraid to a certain extent.
Mr. McDuff, stand up, please, sir. The jury finding you guilty of the offense of capital murder. I assess your punishment at death by lethal injection. Have a seat, please, sir.
As he was sentenced, the mass murderer showed no emotion.
At that moment, Kenneth McDuff becomes the first man in Texas history to get 2 death sentences.
For the family of the victim in this case, convenience store clerk Melissa Northrup, there were tears of relief.
Are you going to be there when he is executed?
I plan to be, if I'm still living.
Does this resolve a lot of things for you and your family?
Yes, it does.
As he's coming out of the courthouse afterwards, I said to him, "Okay, Kenneth, what now?"
I guess I'm gonna die, apparently. We all do, you know.
To McDuff, death was like folding your cards at a card game. It didn't mean that much. He was arrogant enough in his own monstrous way to think he probably would never die. Or certainly he wouldn't die at the hands of the state.
1 year later, McDuff stands trial for the capital murder of Colleen Reed. Now, there's a possibility of getting convicted of the death penalty again. The district attorney's office saw this as an insurance policy. If something happens to the Melissa Northrup conviction, if it gets overturned or something on appeal, we have a backstop. We're going to make sure this man meets his maker.
Their case is a tough case. It's about Colleen Reed, but they do not have her body.
They had Worley's statement and confession as a witness. They had found a hair sample in McDuff's car that could tie Colleen Reed to his car.
All that evidence sent to the DPS crime lab came back that the hair sample was likely Colleen's hair. There was a positive on her blood that was collected. That gave us that link to Colleen being inside the Thunderbird. And fortunately, the jury in that case felt that we had enough convincing evidence to positively put him there at the abduction of Colleen.
The jury deliberates 2.5 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Kenneth McDuff is once again sentenced to death.
You couldn't get enough death penalties on McDuff. If you could get 2, get 2. If you could get 10, get 10. Because he showed us what 3 capital murders did. They got him out.
He's being escorted by the bailiffs down the center aisle of the courtroom. Female reporters from television, they thought, oh my God, he's about to go after us.
I said, turn loose of me. Settle down, fella.
And when he says, don't touch me, well, they grab on tighter.
This ain't necessary to be hanging on to.
Don't you want to be there?
McDuff's on death row. He became the poster boy for criminal justice reform in the state of Texas. A series of laws and reforms were pushed through called the McDuff laws. It went through fast because the public was so outraged. All the inmates that thought they were going to get out with minimum sentences, they suddenly all realized we're going to do time and a long time because of Kenneth McDuff. McDuff becomes the most hated and despised man in the prison system.
Once the McDuff story broke, Texas was engaging in the largest prison building binge in the history of the free world. Much of that is a result of what McDuff's story brought forth.
While McDuff languishes in prison, the nightmare for his victims' families continues. By 1998, 7 years after Regina Moore, Brenda Thompson, and Colleen Reed were murdered, their bodies have still not been found.
I don't think my parents ever got over what happened. I remember thinking, it's okay. Wherever she is, wherever her remains are, it's okay. I've come to terms with it.
From his prison cell, McDuff continues to maintain his innocence.
Is there any way to tell them where Colleen Reed is? They still haven't found her body. Is there any way to make amends?
First of all, I would have to know where it was at.
Did you ever kill anybody?
No.
Not even those kids back in 1966?
No.
As McDuff's execution date draws near, a female informant, close to the killer, offers to try to get him to reveal the locations of the bodies.
Lo and behold, when she got talking to McDuff, he had an exact recollection, to the foot, of where the location of Regina Moore and Brenda Thompson.
Investigators say they may have found the remains of a Waco woman abducted 7 years ago by notorious serial killer Kenneth McDuff. It's believed to be 21-year-old Regina Moore, who was last seen struggling in McDuff's car in 1991.
Brenda Thompson, the other one, was the young lady that he picked up. Yep, I believe this is the place. Right here. And so I had a stick and I poke it in the ground. It went down. There was a cavity or some unnatural void. So I got down on my hands and knees and I tried to see what that was in there. I pulled it up. I thought that might be an arm bone. And so we knew we had her. Brenda Thompson, who'd been with McDuff when she tried to kick her way out of the truck he was in, and she didn't make it. And this is where she ended up. And that's how we found her. It felt good to accomplish it. It was part of the last chapter of such a sad, sad thing. McDuff didn't seem to have, for whatever reason, a big problem talking to the informant about the location of Regina Moore and Brenda Thompson. But he did not want to tell where Colleen Reed was. He said, "You all won't need me anymore if I tell you."
John Moriarty is spending 40 hours with McDuff trying to get any hint of where Colleen Reed's body might be so you could give some sort of relief to the family.
McDuff says he's got a toothache. Well, a bulb goes off with me. Well, I said, hey, let me see if I can help you out, but here's the deal. If I help you out, you need to tell us where Colleen's body is. He agrees to it. They fixed his tooth. He was happy, came down and then drew us a map and told us where he buried her.
He said she's near the Brazos River in Falls County. Between these roads, there's a big tree, and so many feet from there, we all converged on this site above the river.
We've got bulldozers and all sorts of things, and we're out there hours and hours and hours, and we're not getting anywhere. I had talked with McDuff about it, that, look, if we have trouble, you okay with coming out and showing us? Oh, yeah. And you got to understand, this guy's been locked up, for 7 years, and he ain't going nowhere, but this is a field trip.
I had no earthly idea that you could take a person on death row who's due to be executed in like 2 weeks and put him in a vehicle and drive him away from the prison.
I get in the car with him one-on-one. I said, now we need to find the body. I said, you have entered into an agreement. Tell me what you remember when you brought her out here. And he said, I think it's going to be right in there somewhere. I mean, 2 passes with the tractor, and it popped up part of her skull.
That big cottonwood tree was where Colleen Reed was found.
Finding her to me was just a shock. I just couldn't believe we actually got her.
When they found her and found the remains, I said, thank God, bless them, they have the closure they needed. But she's still gone. She still suffered. I realize as a grown man, there's a beginning and there's an end. But in the middle, you want to make sure you have popcorn in the movie. Colleen suffered. Colleen's death was terrible. And there was no need for anyone to die that way.
They had a team of forensic people, and they wanted to properly get her out.
We had a box, just a cardboard box, and we put her in there. Chuck said, we're not putting her in the trunk, and we're putting her inside the car.
I think she needs to ride in the car with everybody else.
So we put her in the car, and we came back to Austin.
I got the call that they had found what they believed to be Colleen. And then I found out that JW wouldn't just put Colleen in a box in the trunk. They wouldn't give up. They would not give up. I had made a promise to my parents, and the boys helped me live up to that promise. I mean, I didn't know where to go look for her. They did. And found her. And because of them, we got to bring her home.
Executions in Texas are carried out at the Walls Unit. It's in downtown Huntsville. It's this big red brick tall wall structure from the late 1800s, the oldest prison in the system. And when you leave prison, you leave from there. You either leave from the front door, or if it's an execution, you're leaving in a pine box made by inmates.
We went to see him, Charles Meyer and myself, 6, maybe 7 times over a period of time, just talking to him. We knew he was going to die the next day, so we were going to get one more shot at him. I remember asking him, I said, you know, Mac, they're going to kill you tomorrow. And he goes, no, they're not. And Chuck said, yeah, they are. It's going to happen. I said, well, let's just say they are. Now, we've not read you your rights. We're having a conversation. Why don't you just tell all? If there's any more out there, tell us where they're at. He said, no, there's nobody else.
From what I hear, he is afraid of dying. What do you think he's afraid of?
Meeting his maker, who is the devil himself. I'd be afraid too.
Victims' families came to the death chamber to watch the execution of the man who has ripped a dozen families apart.
The families of Robert Brand, the teenager that had been murdered in 1966, came. Melissa Northrop's family, they came. They wanted the assurance that this couldn't happen to anyone else.
I wanted to know he was dead. I wanted to know that McDuff would never, ever hurt anyone again. But watching McDuff die would not do anything for my grief, for my pain, or for my soul. So I chose not to witness it.
The one striking thing that day, there were no death penalty protesters. Usually there was always a large contingent of them. They didn't show up that day. They're like, this guy's worthy of getting the death penalty.
There's a team of several correctional officers, 5 or 6, that escort him. Very rarely do you see them being fought into that chamber. They don't want to look bad to the other inmates that are on death row. He's going to go out like a man. He's brought in to the room and strapped down onto the gurney. The warden is standing at the head of the bed, and the chaplain is standing at the foot of the bed with his hand on his leg. The warden's talking to him at the time. He asks him if he has anything that he wants to say, a statement to make.
The family of the victims are literally surrounding him, and he says nothing for them. His last words were, "I'm ready to be released. Release me." To the very end, he's self-centered and selfish and just a beast.
My cousin Mark, this is my Uncle Robert, and my future aunt.
For this Fort Worth family, the wait has been a long 32 years, and the pain immense. To watch McDuff paroled in 1989 to murder and rape again.
Very unfair to the other victims. He should not have been released the first time. You don't release a triple murderer to go out and kill and kill and kill again.
McDuff was executed for the kidnapping and murder of Melissa Northrop, a mother who left 2 children behind.
I'll tell them that he was laying on a table, he had a needle in his arm, he went to sleep, and his heart stopped. And I will also tell them he died easily. He died nothing like your mother did.
I know that I never have to walk into another courtroom and look at him again. This part is over.
Hallelujah. God bless the young without mothers.
Colleen was Daddy's precious, darling, baby, angel girl.
God bless the child who suffers.
When Colleen was brought home back to Austin, it was important to me that the community have an opportunity to pay their respects and to say goodbye. The entire community had suffered for almost 7 years, not knowing where she was. And I couldn't think of anything better than to have the law enforcement officers escort her casket into the sanctuary for her funeral.
Lori Bible honored us more than she should have by allowing us to be pallbearers for her sister, Colleen. Maybe 6 or 7 of us carried her.
And we bring our gratitude to those whose caring pursuit of justice has made these healing moments possible.
The system let us down, and that caused us all a great deal of pain. But there is still honor. These people who believe in helping us find justice, the community needed to see them. Bring her home.
You know, the job was just done. There was a great satisfaction on my part to see the laws changed. Actually, good came out of all of this suffering. McDuff was supposed to go back to Rosebud to be buried there, and when the word got out, there was an outcry in Rosebud. McDuff was taken by inmates to a prison cemetery nearby. An anonymous marker on the grave that only has his death row number. There are psychopaths among us. You really need a way to keep them behind bars to protect the rest of us, because they prey on the innocent when they're free to kill.